Tonight, 3 men,
You just can't forget it. You cannot forget.
3 stories.
This is where they met their last days.
We all had one thing in common, that was death.
3 lives changed forever.
The last time when I saw them, I didn't even have a chance to say goodbye.
The stories of the Holocaust. The stories of Auschwitz. The stories of survival.
I won. I survived. I somehow came out scarred.
Come along with CBS 4 News as we take you on a journey of reflection, a journey of hope, a journey with one purpose: to never forget.
Good evening. My name is Jordan Zimmerman. Zimmerman Advertising is honored to present tonight's CBS 4 News special, The March of the Living, Return to Auschwitz. Tonight's program captures the emotional journey of 3 South Florida Holocaust survivors as they return to the death camps of Auschwitz and participate in the March of the Living. It's an educational program that brings people from all over the world to Poland on Holocaust Remembrance Day. The Holocaust may seem like a nightmare, impossible to understand how 11 million people, 6 million of them Jews, could be killed, systematically murdered in horrific ways. But it is a reality, part of our world's history, and an event of global importance that the world cannot and must not ever forget. A generation that does not learn from its history is doomed to repeat it. The Holocaust has taught us that even in modern times, an entire race is vulnerable to the hatred and persecution from others. When I think of my 7-year-old daughter, how could she possibly understand the pain and suffering her ancestors endured to ensure the survival of our people? Only a program like March of the Living can bring that experience to life. In South Florida alone, there are over 12,000 survivors of the Holocaust, victims of unimaginable loss and tragedy. Tonight, I am dedicating our sponsorship of this program to them, to their resilience, to their strength, and to their capacity to endure. Against the darkest moments of evil, the survivors' spirits have illuminated a path of hope and survival for the Jewish people. We will never forget.
Reflected in a pond of water lilies that rise from the mud and muck to bloom and greet the sun anew each day, stands a towering hand of humanity, its tentacles good and evil.
You stand there almost paralyzed, and the whole past goes right through your heart and soul.
The power of the Holocaust Memorial of Miami Beach dwarfs Holocaust survivor David Schechter. For him, the portraits of pain are personal.
When you saw a glimmer of the eyes of the other children in the cattle cars, what did you see in their eyes?
They were screaming and crying, but no one could hear them.
At 82 years old, the decades have not dimmed the screams that haunt his dreams. He was just 11 years old when he was pushed out of the darkness of a cattle car.
People were falling out, and they were beating us with clubs to jump out.
Onto a dirt road leading to the most notorious death camp, Auschwitz. He was separated from everyone but his older brother, Jacob, who for months cared for him until...
And I knew that they had shot Jake.
That cold day, he lost his hero. For David, the memory of his brother is a driving force behind a lifetime committed to retelling the story of the Holocaust, a path and passion he has long shared with these two men, two survivors, orphaned as he was, their entire families exterminated by the Nazis. He now considers them his brothers, bonded by history and horror. Joe Sachs was 15 when ripped apart from his parents and all loved ones. At age 86, he's put to words his nightmare.
These images that you saw will not pass on when you pass on. You want them to live forever.
Exactly. Exactly.
As he prepares to travel back to the death camps of Poland, his 8th journey, this trip will be different. He's waited 70 years for this piece of paper that just came in the mail, confirmation that his father was killed and died in Auschwitz.
Hopefully, this is where I will pour out my soul, because I know for sure now where it happened.
Taking the journey with him and David Schechter, 83-year-old David Mermelstein, who remembers the night air at Auschwitz filled with the smoke and the smell of bodies that had been cremated, a fate he would learn his loved ones met. These 3 men have devoted their lives to giving first-hand accounts of what they've witnessed, and as CBS 4 has documented for more than a decade, they've been relentless advocates for survivors. Now, with the help of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, they head back to lead the largest group of South Floridians to ever journey together to the camps, bringing them face to face with the tangible evidence of their darkest hour.
The obligation to honor those who could not walk out of the camps drives them to go back, perhaps one last time.
The emotion is almost unbearable.
But you go back.
But we go back. We go back, yeah. We go back.
The train rides were terrifying. They lasted for days at a time. Whole families herded into small cattle cars with just what they could carry, forced to share space with more than 100 strangers. They sat in endless darkness with an unbearable stench while people around them were trampled to death. It was inhumane. At age 15, David Mermelstein and his family were loaded onto a cramped wooden train car. The door slammed shut and locked.
They put in 2 buckets, a bucket of water to the right and an empty bucket for facilities. And you can imagine 100 people in a wagon. There was not enough room for everybody to sit.
This right here is the entrance to Birkenau. It's part of Auschwitz, possibly one of the most notorious death camps in Poland. Hundreds of thousands of people made their way in here on trains. Very few got out. David was one of the lucky ones. He did survive to tell his story, but he's the only one in his family. He, like most people who rode the rail to hell here at Birkenau, never remembers a sunny day here, just cold, dreary, and filled with death. He stepped off the train in the spot where he's standing now, greeted by the man nightmares are made of, Dr. Death himself, Josef Mengele.
And as we were facing this way, Dr. Mengele was standing about where that man is.
This was a dreaded selection process. No one knew at the time, but depending what line you were put in, it determined whether you lived or were sent directly to the gas chamber. Women, children, the old, the sick had very little chance of ever seeing another day, just like the people on the left side of this photo.
He looked at you, had on white gloves and a little stick, and just motioned to right or left.
This was the moment when David escaped death and was chosen to live.
The cop would ask me, how old are you? I said, 15. 15, he says, no, tell him 17. Stretch out, look tall, and pinch yourself. Well, I had a half a minute to walk over where my 2 brothers were, and I stepped on their shoes to look taller. And I pinched myself. At that time, I didn't know why, but then we found out. You pinch yourself, your cheeks get red, you look healthier.
Your family, this was the last time you saw them.
The last time when I saw them, I didn't even have a chance to say goodbye. Two of my older brothers went to the right. My grandfather, my parents, two brothers and a sister, and my aunt went to the left. And that's the ones that went, and I saw them the last time. Not even had a chance to say goodbye. We didn't know where we going. We didn't know where they were going.
David's family followed the same path as these people, straight to the gas chambers and the ovens. He still remembers watching them walk away until he could see them no more. David, meanwhile, was led off to the barracks in this area, which is now just a vast open space of ruins. Here's where his head was shaved. He was given a striped uniform and crammed into a wooden bunk bed like this, with no mattress, just strangers, with barely enough room to move, let alone find any comfort. It wasn't until the following day when he learned from an SS guard what happened to his family.
People started to ask him, can you tell us when we could see our parents? What happened to our sisters? Where are they going? Are they going to come here? So he didn't say nothing and didn't answer nothing for about a half a minute. Then he told us to come to the door. We came to the door and he opens the door and he says, I want all of you to look outside. You see the chimneys, you see the smoke. There are no parents and no brothers and sisters. You wouldn't have to ask no more.
We all had one thing in common, that was death.
David Schechter and his family were taken from Slovakia when he was just 11. When the train stopped and the door was flung open, he was at Auschwitz. He remembers seeing his mother and sister pulled away from him and immediately led away with other women and children. And through the pain in his eyes, you can see how he still remembers exactly how helpless he felt.
I didn't know what the hell to say. I didn't know what to do. I saw the scariness and the ugliness and how they were pushed and how they were treated and how they were trembling.
What do you think happened to your mom and your sisters?
I know. They were the mass shooting. Right here in this area.
At that moment, David learned very quickly Auschwitz was a killing factory.
From the minute they unloaded the train to the minute they started killing the people from that train, it took less than 2 hours.
David's older brother Jacob was a quick thinker. In a split second, he saved David's life. Remember, David was just 11. Most kids that age were put into lines like this one and sent off to the gas chambers. Young kids were of no use to the Nazis unless they were taken away for cruel medical experiments. Many of those experiments happening right here in these buildings at Auschwitz.
I don't know what that possessed Jacob to tell me to stand on his 2 feet, okay? Stand in front of him and stand on his 2 feet so that I'd look a little bigger, okay? And I'm convinced that they did it, otherwise I would have been sent to the same site with my mom, and because I wasn't that big and that strong looking of a guy.
Although Jacob was killed by the Nazis, David survived. He was sent out with the others to work. He lived in Barrack 8 on a bunk like this one with 3 other guys sleeping on the straw. As he walked through Auschwitz every day, he lived with the fear of knowing that his fate could change in the blink of an eye.
These crazy bastards they'd walk by you, these Gestapo guys, and just hit and kick, and occasionally even take the pistol and shoot you.
This courtyard here at Auschwitz was notorious for torture. For example, at these poles here, this is where people would have their wrists tied behind their backs and then they would hang from here. Also, that wall right there, that's where people were shot and killed. Inside these buildings, we see the graphic reminders of just how many hundreds of thousands of people passed through here. We see the luggage they carried with them when they were rounded up, as they held on to hope that they were just being relocated, not murdered. we see their personal items heaped onto a pile. And we see their shoes, as far as the eye can see. Most heartbreaking of all, those little shoes, the ones that belong to the helpless children who died here. And we know that behind every pair of shoes is someone's story. Most are heartbreaking stories of fear before dying in the gas chamber or being starved and sent to the ovens. But there are some stories of survival, of life, of triumph, of bravery, and sometimes just lucky stories of how people escape the clutches of death.
I'm the only one survived.
Do you ever wonder why you made it? Why you?
Oh yeah, I felt guilty. Why me?
Maybe David and the others are alive so they can share their stories with the world to be a living testimony that evil doesn't always win.
I won. I survived. I somehow came out scarred, but not crippled.
Just outside of Krakow, Poland is Sosnowiec. It's Joe Sack's hometown. At least it was, until 70 years ago, a lifetime ago. That's when Joe was snatched by the Nazis, yanked from everything and everyone he knew.
This was the life. This was the life. And of course, in the morning, I would walk down to the trolley. So,
wiping tears from his eyes, Joe does not see his neighborhood like the rest of us do. In his mind, he's still seeing it like it was 1942. Then he's brought back to the moment, realizing that he's alone. His family is gone and nothing looks the same. What helps him recognize where his house once stood is the address, number 19.
totally different, but the number is there. I looked this up on the Google, and I saw this. I said, what a change, what a change. But here I see it. It's just very, very difficult.
Joe's house was where this ugly Soviet-era apartment building now stands. Next door was his aunt's home, a place filled with childhood memories, now lost to hate.
My parents, my uncles, my cousins, my brother, it's all gone. And that's the emotion that hits you. It's not the buildings, it's the land that you were born on, regardless.
What makes it so emotional for you to come back here?
Childhood, family. Family that's gone.
Is it a good memory or is it a painful memory?
Oh, good memories, of course, of course. You know, childhood memories, regardless of wealth, it's the family that you remember, that you were part of a family, basically, which is lost.
Joe's family, like many Jewish families at the time, was rounded up and forced out of their homes by the Nazis. He was sent to a Jewish ghetto in the middle of town, forced into a flat with several other families. In 1941, this area of town that I'm in right now became known as an open ghetto. That's where all the Jews, Joe and all of his friends around town, they all were concentrated in this area. This was their whole. In ghettos across Europe, the Nazis would rush in, grab hundreds of people in chaotic raids, and force them into labor camps, or worse, death camps. For Joe, his day came in August of 1942, when SS officers burst into his father's factory.
What I said from that day when we were raided, when the factory was raided, and we were brought into that local prison, that's what I'm saying was the day I grew up.
4 days later, his father was sent home, but not Joe. He ended up here at the local train station, a place frozen in time, looking the same today as it did the day Joe said goodbye to the life that he knew.
This was the end of my family life, of being torn away from my family at this spot.
Joe never saw his family again. He ended up like these men, in flimsy striped uniforms, forced to work in labor camps, where many were starved or worked to death. Joe hung on, though, always hoping to learn what happened to his family. He finally got his answer just a couple of months ago. It led him to the crematorium at Auschwitz.
Although I have always believed and suspected that that's where he and the rest of my family met their death, now I know, now I am clear that that's what happened, that this is where they met their last days.
Standing at the ovens at Auschwitz, Joe is finally able to feel some peace. He knows that this is where they ended up. He does not know if perhaps one of these desperate scratches on the wall of the gas chamber next door came from his father, maybe his mother, or his brother. But he does have confirmation, after 70 years, that they made their way in here, but never made it out. Miles from the horror of Auschwitz, just outside Lublin, Poland, it looks like tranquil, picturesque farmland. But the barbed wire, once an electrified fence, gives hint of a more sinister story. This is Mydonic, a concentration camp that ranks right up there with the 5 major extermination centers in Poland. It's here where the largest one-day mass murder in Nazi history took place. In these 3 ditches, 18,000 people were shot and killed in one day. That dark day of history was November 3rd, 1943.
This is the disinfection bear.
Aside from that day, most of the killings here happened inside this building, where many mothers and their children went in, told they would be taking a shower.
And they were pushed inside, they look up, and they don't know. They scream. Why? Because they hear the rumors. This is not really for water. This is for gas. But here, it was water. That wasn't gas. They had a shower.
These hot showers that prisoners would take, there was actually a practical purpose behind it. What would happen is when that hot water would get onto the skin, what it would do is that would actually make the process of gassing more effective. That hot water opens the pores on the skin, making it easier for the gas to penetrate. When hot water flowed from these shower heads, many of these mothers thought they had cheated death. But a hot shower was really the last step before execution.
That hope that they had there, that moment of hope, was over. They were pushed into gas chambers, and they murdered them.
The gas chamber was just steps away. They were crammed into this small room. The door was slammed shut, and the noxious Zyklon B gas was released. It took about 20 agonizing minutes to kill them. There were even peepholes, allowing SS guards to watch the mass executions.
I'm a mother of daughters, so to sit there and think that I could be in a place like that, or that people were with their children holding on, that this was their finality, and it's mind-boggling. And the fear they must have had, and their fear, the absolute fear, just overwhelmed me, that they must have gone through.
And here's where it ended, the ovens, where the dead, or nearly dead, were burned.
If you look at that in a naive way, it will look like a bakery. This is a bakery of human beings. And more accurately, it's a bakery for the Jewish nation. It symbolizes the final solution, the invention of the Nazis, that will be the end of the Jewish nation. Ash. Nothing will remain. Nothing. No one will remember us.
And the world does remember. In fact, every year, thousands march to make sure that no one will ever forget. This is the March of the Living, where teens from around the world, including big groups from Miami-Dade and Broward, march with those who triumphed over death and the hell of the Holocaust. They walk shoulder to shoulder 2 miles from Auschwitz to the killing factory at Birkenau, as they learn the stories firsthand from those who lived to tell. And they see the evidence left behind of the mass murder that happened right where they are standing.
And it was so heartbreaking that people had to go through this and there was no escape to them. And it was just unimaginable. I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Survivor David Schechter marched. He wants the world to remember the 1.5 million young souls that were murdered, the children, killed before they ever had a chance to make their mark on the world.
What could have happened if these 1.5 million children had been given a chance to live? And what they could have contributed to the world, to humanity, to our people.
Those lives are not forgotten. Their stories live on as the faithful say prayers over the site where those 18,000 people were murdered at Mydonic, under a banner that translates to, "Let our fate be a warning to you." They carry out the tradition of throwing sand from Israel on the mass grave to give the dead the promise of the Holy Land. And survivors dedicate themselves until their dying breaths that the deaths of their mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, along with 6 million Jews and millions of others at the hands of hate, will never be forgotten.
I'm so overwhelmed that the world will see us, that the world will hear us, that they'll understand this enormity of the Holocaust, and that they'll never forget it.
Back on Florida soil at the Holocaust Memorial, day after day they walk this sacred ground to keep alive the story of the countless men, women, and children brutally murdered and for whom no gravestone exists.
We needed the world to understand that even in the darkest of minutes, we were always helping each other.
Helping each other up.
Helping each other uplift them, trying to save them.
Like the water lily that each sunrise struggles to surface from the dark depths of the water to greet each day, the triumph of this trio symbolizes the resilience of the human spirit. Those who survived overcame the most evil effort to dehumanize a people.
They gave me a number.
The number you still see, is that a letter A?
Yes.
A4172?
And I was no longer David. I was no longer anything but this.
Gotta see to it that it's not overlooked and forgotten, because it's part of human history.
A world that should never again stand aside, silent in the face of injustice. A mission that drives 3 men, bonded by history, horror, and hope.
We've gone through so much that we're not really that afraid of things.
Yes.
But we are afraid that no one will ever remember the Holocaust.
As the founder of Zimmerman Advertising, and on behalf of more than 1,100 of our Zimmerman associates, I am proud to have made possible the uninterrupted presentation of tonight's CBS 4 News special, The March of the Living, Return to Auschwitz. This was painful and heartbreaking to watch. The actions were unthinkable, the results unbearable. But while this is a world filled with suffering, it is also a world filled with hope and perseverance. So let us feed off the emotions of what we've seen tonight and do our part to stop this kind of hatred and hostility from ever occurring again. Make no mistake, man's inhumanity to man still exists. Genocide threatens the innocent in Somalia, Rwanda, Darfur, and the Congo. The March of the Living serves as a beacon to unite in defense of the helpless and preservation of the hopeless. In the words of Anne Frank, how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Let's not wait. Let's not forget.